Good morning. Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Today I want to talk about the historical uh, differentiation between romance and romanticism. Last time, when I was receiving feedback from some of the students, I realized that some of you do not really differentiate between the two and use them interchangeably. There may be no harm in doing this in general sense, but historically we need to identify the difference between the use of the word romance and romanticism or romantics. So my apologies for beginning this lecture from the other way around. Ideally, you do not have exposure to romanticism so far, so you could have expected me to start with romance and then proceed toward romanticism. But mm, uh, I have to start from romanticism. So if you look at the mind map, uh, you see that romanticism is in attitude. It refers to an attitude or intellectual orientation. An important thing for you to remember here is that when literary writers deal with their subject, the subject may be similar in different cases, but the attitude is important. It depends upon the attitude of the writer or the literary figure that determines the orientation or the classification of the subject matter into different categories. So, when you say that romanticism is an attitude or intellectual orientation, we say that it was seen or it was characterized in many works of literature. It was also reflected in painting, music, architecture, criticism, and other forms of historiography in the Western civilization over a period from the late 18th century till the mid 19th century. So, when you say what romanticism is in English history, you actually refer to that attitudinal trend that we saw emerging in the late 18th century. Uh, and when you talk about this attitude, or when you try to identify this attitude, you come to know that this attitude banked upon rejection of the principles of order, calm, harmony, balance, idealization, and also rationality. And why did they reject these notions? They were actually typical of classical literature mm, before the arrival of romanticism. So we see that before the arrival of romanticism, there was order, calm, harmony, balance, idealization, and rationality advocated by the literary figures. On the other hand, the romantic approach or the romantic attitude towards these values or these notions was that when you write or when you express yourselves as literary figures or literary writers, your emphasis should be on the individual. Means you are important. The subjective. The subjective means that What is there in your heart? What do you value? The irrational, the imaginative. So, of course, irrational and imaginative may go side by side in a sense, because what appeals to your imagination may not be rational all the time. And irrational is actually a contrast to the classical approach of reason. Like, whatever you say or whatever you write should be justifiable through reason. And if something is not supported by reason, can be categorized as irrational. The personal was important, your personal self is important. The spontaneous. Spontaneous is also important. Romantics believed that when you write something or when you express something, this should be something spontaneous. Like, you should not spend time and energy on mm, you know planning and devising things. Say whatever comes to your heart should be treated as spontaneous, and something which appeals to your emotions, means your emotional superiority should be there in your expressions. The visionary, whatever you can envision for yourself. And the supernatural, of course. Supernatural means something which is over and above humans. So these characteristics, when you say, so far we have tried to uh, identify two kinds of attitudes or approaches toward literature. One is that of classical, who believed in order, calm, harmony, balance, idealization. Their writings were directed toward the collective good of the society, while Romanticism, or the Romantics, those people who followed the notions of Romanticism, believed that the individual is important, the subjective self is important, uh, and your imagination is important, spontaneity is important, placing your emotions above all is important. So these two trends that we see are the hallmark of the 18th century. Now again, among the characteristic attitude of romanticism, some of them included a deepened appreciation of the beauties of nature. So when you read romantics, you will realize that they highly value and appreciate the beauties of nature. Another characteristic attitude of the romantics is a general exaltation of emotion over reason. So I am in a sense explaining the earlier point. A general exaltation of emotion over reason. So you place emotion above reason when you write, when you express yourself. Or of the senses over intellect, means you have an intellect and you have the senses. So the senses are more important, they should be above the intellect. Again, a turning in upon the self, means turn to yourself, see inside yourself, and a heightened examination of human personality and its moods and mental potentialities. So your focus is on your own self. Your inside is more important than what is outside you. A preoccupation with the genius, the hero, and the exceptional figure in general, and a focus on his passions and inner struggles. A new view of the artist as a supremely individual creator. Remember, Supremely individual creator means you are the original creator, the mind behind whatever comes out of your mind. And your creative spirit is more important than strict adherence to formal rules and traditional procedures. So, what did they do? They characterized all those measures taken by the classical writers for order, calm, harmony, balance as traditional formal procedures. And they said that an emphasis upon imagination is a gateway to superior experience and spiritual truth. If you want to look into the world outside or the world that is not even visible to you, that exists at the level of a spirit, you can use your imagination as a gateway to experience that particular thing. And then they said that you should have uh, interest in folk culture, national and ethnic cultural origins, and the medieval era. Now, this is important. And the medieval era. Why? Because whatever they were after mostly resembled the prevailing trends in the medieval era, and a liking for the exotic, the remote, the mysterious, the occult. Occult means mystical, supernatural, or magical powers, practices, or phenomena. The monstrous, the diseased, and even the satanic. So, all these characteristics, they were important for the Romantics, and they presented them as as alternatives to what the classical writers had projected or what they had preached in their writings. And more importantly, we notice that they have their love for the medieval era because these characteristics were abundant in the medieval literature. So, till here, we have tried to clarify two concepts. One is classical and the other one is romantic. I'm not going into too much details about these two trends because you have still some time to spend in your history class before you qualify to know about what actually romanticism and classicism was all about. But for the sake of understanding and appreciating romance, which you have already studied, you need to differentiate between romanticism and romance. So, classical and romanticism. If there are still questions in your mind regarding their actual placement in history, their advocates, the people who worked in these two trends, we leave it to the appropriate time. So far, what I hope is that we have by now established a generalized difference between two kinds of attitudes. One was classical attitude and the other one was romantic attitude. And we also came to know that the classical attitude was based on order, calm, harmony, balance, idealization, while the romantics they gave more importance to the individual, to the subjective, to the irrational, the personal, emotion over reason, and sense over intellect. These were some of the characteristic attitudes of romantics. Then, moving forward, we try to go and establish a link with our main topic for today. We say that historically, Romanticism proper was preceded by several related developments from the mid 18th century. One that can be termed pre-Romanticism means there was a period which was not uh, declared as a romantic period, but it was a period that preceded the arrival of Romanticism. And one such trend in the pre-Romantic era was a new appreciation of the medieval romance, from which the Romantic movement derives its name. So one point that we have established so far very clearly is that when we talk about Romanticism, we can say that the name of this movement, romantic movement or romanticism, has been derived from medieval romance that we have already learned in our previous lecture. To reiterate and to uh, make things more clear for us and for those students who have still some confusion over the concept of romance is uh, it was a tale or ballad of chivalric adventure whose emphasis on individual heroism and on the exotic and the mysterious was in clear contrast to the elegant formality and artificiality of prevailing classical forms of literature, as we had noticed in uh, the Anglo-Saxon heroic poetry, and this will slowly and gradually come to the surface. For example, mm, mm, the replacement of the older heroic poetry by the verse romance marks a significant change in taste and sensibility. How? Because heroic poetry is sterner in mood, more realistic in treatment, and claims to deal with the exploits of heroes who have had some real place in history. The romance is more frankly escapist. Now, this is important. When you talk about romance, it is an escapist approach, and the marvelous is introduced for its own sake. Means, if you look at the mind map, we see that romance was escapist. Now, some of you may be finding it difficult to determine what do we mean by escapist. Escapist means that you try to mm, stay away from the harsh realities of life, and this can be done through imagination, and this can be done through suppressing your intellect and allowing your senses and emotions to dominate you, that you become escapist. Fighting in heroic poetry was a grim affair. We noticed in the case of Beowulf that was a grim affair. Why? Because he had to engage in that for some specific purpose. And even the most valiant hero was liable to lose if he fought against heavy odds. So this we noticed very clearly in Beowulf, that people would ask heroes to fight for them, and that would be a matter of life and death for all of them. And then again, uh, if you make a mistake, you are liable to die. So you can die in the course of fight. But in contrast, if we see in the romance, characters fight on principle, as it were, or a matter of fashion, means either you fight for a principle, which may not be a very grim affair, as we have referred to in the case of Anglo-Saxon poetry. You may be doing it for a fashion. It may be becoming of you to fight, often without any specific object. No objective may be there when you decide to go for a fight, and then the outcome would depend more on the character of the fighter than on the odds against which he is fighting. And the whole thing is done ritualistically as a stylized sport rather than a desperate necessity. So the point that was actually made in this discussion was that overall, now let's try to rebuild the whole map in front of us. On the one hand, we have romanticism, and on the other hand, we have romance. For the sake of understanding of romanticism, we needed to have a discussion on neoclassical or classical approach to literature. And there we noticed that the classical people, they were more often rationally motivated toward literature. They said that literature should be something that should follow orders. There should be calm, harmony, balance, and idealization, and all these things should be there as characteristic features of literary writings. Then came the Romantics, and they said that no, this is not appropriate. You cannot tie, you cannot restrict the imaginative power of a writer by forcing him or her to adhere to these traditional rules and principles. Rather, the writer should be given the upper hand. He is more important, his emotion is more important, his sense is more important, his subjectivity, his individualism, his personal self, his emotional self, all these uh, mm, mm, parameters, you can say, or all these um, facets and manifestations of his personality are more important than those earlier defined traditional rules and principles. So these were two polarized approaches to literature. And then we see that from where did romantics get their guidance? The classicals actually looked to the Latin and the Greek writers who believed in these rules and principles. The Romantics, on the other hand, looked to the medieval era, where romance was uh, the attitude or the practice at that time. And they were inspired by the medieval era, the notions of the medieval era, and they went for romanticism. And this romantic movement or romanticism actually is derived from medieval romance. So till here we come to that point we have already discussed. So the two things, the new things they have already been done. Now when we come to romance, again we need to compare it with heroic poetry, and we see that romance was actually in contrast to the Anglo-Saxon heroic poetry, and there we see again it was a matter of attitude. You know, romance was ritualistic, it was a kind of a sport, it had no specific object, and it was escapist. While heroic poetry was a grim affair, the hero had to fight, the hero had to prove himself for the greater good of the society. Any mistake on his part might have destroyed him or the rest of the society. So there is a huge difference between the approach of treating the subject matter. So there we see that in the beginning was Anglo-Saxon poetry, to which romance emerged as a contrast, or as a, you can say, as an alternate. And then in the 18th century we see that there was classicism, and classicism was confronted by yet a different attitude toward literature, and that was in the shape of romanticism. Okay, till here I have done with my lecture for today, but before concluding, one important thing that I would like to clarify is that when you talk about literature, you can't compartmentalize each subject matter into a particular trend in literature. Like, you can't say that if this is a romance, this cannot be a ballad. Or if you say if this is a lyric, this cannot be an epic. The point is not in the subject matter. The point is in the attitude or the approach of the writer. Sometimes you may see the qualities of a romance even in an epic, even a ballad, a lyric. So all these can overlap depending upon the attitude of the writer. So this is more important. Please be clear about this, that if we say that this particular poem is a romance, does not mean that it is disqualified to be included in any other form of literature. Every critic, every person has the right to examine and to observe the individual characteristics of a piece of writing, and then to determine where to place the same, and it may fit into different places at a time. So this should be, I hope, clear. In case of any questions regarding today's lecture, you can post your comments. For your homework, I would ask all of you, I would invite your attention that now this whole mind map is clear in front of you. I hope that some of you might be very well into understanding the romance. I may be interested in anyone who can search some romantic or classical work, and if he or she finds these characteristic things, these calm, harmony, or emotion, reason, and if they can post something additional or new to the discussion that we have had today, will be so great, and I shall be very thankful for that. Okay, enjoy your day. Have a nice time. Thank you.